Hey, Sarab.
Hey, Erica. And she's a New York Times bestselling author of the book Winning from Within, a breakthrough method for leading, living, and lasting change. The book has been translated into over 10 different languages. Erica is a world renowned trusted advisor to CEOs of leading global companies. She's also a senior contributor to Forbes, where she writes on topics of leadership and events of the day. Time between Amsterdam, the Netherlands, which is also where I am, and New York City in the US. We are honored and privileged to have Erica with us today to hear from her and learn more about the most difficult negotiations we can have, the ones with ourselves. Welcome, Erica, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Let me first also thank Mohit for having me. I've just so enjoyed all of this conference and listening to you, and also to give a big shout out to Sarab, who really engaged me in coming, and he was so committed that all of you would get a signed book, that he came to my house in the Netherlands, stood 6 feet away with his mask and his gloves to give me books so that I would sign them. And I have to say that was extreme commitment. So Sarab, thank you for bringing me here.
It's our pleasure, Erica.
And also a shout out to Ajay, who brought in Winning from Within and brought in these themes that I will elaborate on around mindset and all of that. I do want to say I feel a little guilty because I am not one of the hardest working people I know. So I cannot stand next to any of you, obviously. I work hard, but not like one of the hardest. So it's clear to me that all of you have a very high level of conviction around what you do, and that you bring and invest an enormous amount of yourselves in what you do. I do want to talk a little bit about the personal development and learning development that I think is so important for professionals and leaders. You guys talked a couple times about gig workers and the need for gig workers to be constantly on a lifelong journey. And you mentioned different times about needing adaptability or flexibility, with people having new, more flexible commercial models, and all of that adaptability has to do with learning and developing yourself as a human being and as a leader. I think one of the challenging questions for me coming out of this session is the paradox that on the one hand, you talk about AI and automation and digitization, and of course the role of data and data analytics and data mining. And at the same time, Mohit started off talking about sentience. And a sentient being is not a machine. A sentient being is a human being who has the capability for awareness of herself, awareness of himself, and awareness of the environment surrounding them. And so as I hear you thinking about the quantum leap, my inquiry and my challenge would be, how can we be as adept at using data, particularly as we all start remote working, as you've talked about many times this morning, and protect our humanity, protect the essence. You've talked about culture. Sarab has talked to me at length about how important ethics and values are in your company, and that takes humanity. So I just think that's an interesting dilemma, if I can say it that way. So Winning from Within has a couple of core principles I want to share with you. And one of them is what it says here, that the most important negotiations you have in your life, both for your impact and also the quality of fulfillment, I would say, are the negotiations that you have with yourself. As we'll get to in a moment, I think of leadership the same way, which is the most important leadership moments that you will have in your life have to do with how you lead yourself. And how you lead yourself will enable negotiating the terms and conditions and the MSAs and all of the things that you've talked about. It has to do with the push and pulls in your mind and how you start to lead your own internal landscape, your interior world. And that's how you become more and more effective over time at leading people, leading client relationships, leading society forward. and thinking of yourself as a lifelong learner. So in a minute, I'm going to ask Saurabh, but not yet, to help me do a little very short demonstration. But I want to share with you a conversation I had recently with my stepson to set the stage for why we should be lifelong learners and adapters. If any of you read the book that we signed for you, it talks about how my husband loves to sail. He's Dutch. And I grew up right outside New York City. We didn't spend a lot of time in nature. So I find the experience of going on this boat very frustrating. And I recently was out on the water with him and with his son, my stepson, who is 14 years old. And at some point he asked me to do something. And I said, I hate sailing. And he said, how could you hate sailing? And I said, I hate feeling incompetent. Like you keep asking me to help and I don't know how to help. So then I just get so aggravated because I can't help. And he said, you are helping. It just isn't working. Which I really thought was a perfect stance as we all go through all the emergent challenges and opportunities that come with a quantum leap. Right out of the gate, we're not going to do everything as well as we do things we've done all along. But, you know, if it's not working, you just kind of keep going. And that is very much the spirit of this journey, which has no end, of course. I want to ask Saurabh for a moment to read with me at the same time. We're going to really read at the same time. And I want to ask, to the best of your ability, that you listen to what both of us are saying. Okay, so we've both grabbed books randomly. You don't need to know which book we grabbed. And Saurabh, on the count of 3, please start reading. 1, 2, 3.
If the Dutch government's vaccination
The nervous system begins
to plan,
as the outer layer of cells that will become the skin.
Economy will grow by 2.1%.
Certain clusters of these outer cells
by the end of
then pulled inward to form a neural tube,
in
the
its
spinal cord.
outlook.
This
Consumers
origin
and
of neurons,
are
the
expected to
basic
spend
cells
more.
of the brain
The
on
rising
the
unemployment
outside,
will dampen the
and their
effects
journey inside the body developmentally. Okay, so let's pause. How many people, just ask yourself, or I guess you can wave or make a smiley. How many were able to understand everything both of us said? Oh, wow, that's impressive. Yeah, no, exactly. How many people were able to understand all of what one of us said?
Well,
how many people
we see is not many on the chat.
Yes. So how many people understood nothing that either of us said? Excellent. Okay. So the point of this demonstration is not that if 2 people speak at the same time, it's hard to understand them. That's, I think, a good established principle. What this is trying to show is it's something like what happens inside our own mind. It's as if more than one voice is talking at the same time. So one voice might say, let's roll the dice and see, maybe we have a growth opportunity. Another voice might say, yo, let's not take the risk. You know, we have steady growth. We don't need to go for exponential growth. We heard from someone today who has a newborn baby. One voice might say, oh, I should go spend time with the baby. Another voice might say, oh, I have to answer all these emails, but I should spend time with the baby, but I need to catch up on email. Everyone has this dynamic in their mind. What's challenging even more than what you just saw with Saurabh and me is we don't only have 2 voices. We have many voices in our head. And you guys can show the second slide if you want to. We have all these voices in our mind. Some say this is what I want. Some say this is how I feel. Some say this is what I will do. Some say this is what I think. And to some extent, we can get overwhelmed by this debate. You know, it can sound sometimes like a hostile talk show with the different hosts speaking about different things. And one of the dimensions of the journey to self-awareness, to full sentience, is the journey to start to be able to pull these voices apart, so you can hear them one at a time. They still have different perspectives. They still will tell you their own advice, which won't overlap. But ultimately, you get to decide, and you'll make a much better choice, more efficient, more effective, more sustainable. If you, at the center of all this, can hear these voices and then make an informed choice as if they're all your sort of inner board. So what I have done in my research and in the book, Winning from Within, is take these different parts of us, these different voices, and connect them with some timeless archetypes. If I can show you that on the next slide. Archetypes are sort of master blueprints for the human experience. And there are many, many different parts. Anyone here who has heard of Joseph Campbell knows that he wrote a famous book, A Hero with 1,000 Faces. Oh, good. Because I work with business people, I thought 1,000 faces was quite a lot of faces. So I boiled them down to 4, what I call the big 4, because these are the most fundamental in the human experience and also most effective. They're the best leverage if you can have all 4 of these on call at any time when you need them. So let me just say a word about each of these 4, and then you can read more in your excellent conference book. You have the thinker, well known to many of you. That's your analytic horsepower that focuses on data, that manages risk, uses clarity. Then you have the dreamer. That is about vision, aspiration. Someone today used the word audacity, which I loved. It's about possibility. The lover is about people. You guys have talked a lot about trust, about culture. How are we going to keep remote workers and home workers and office workers in this sort of hybrid environment feeling bound together, especially new hires or acquisitions? How are we going to do that? That's the lover impulse to keep people together. And then there's the warrior part of you, which is about getting things done. It's about performance. So the most typical, let's say, spike that I see working with leaders is people feel very comfortable in the thinker warrior space. This will not be true of all of you, but there's a tendency for those things to be rewarded in a workplace, that you can analyze information and that you can get things done. What's limiting about that, if we go back to Mohit's video of going to the moon, if you're going to analyze something and get it done, you really want to start with a big dream. I love the person who was saying, we're all in the present. We need to spend more time emailing each other about the future, right? What's the dream? What's the big grand quantum leap that we want to make? Then we can think about, how are we going to do it? How should we understand the challenges and obstacles, opportunities? But you really want to start with the dream. And secondly, a lot of people leave out their lover, which carries their emotional intelligence and the impulses around people. This includes, but it isn't limited to, the discussions around diversity and inclusion, right? This is about people, getting diverse teams with different viewpoints. It's also just the impulse to ask yourself, if you have your dream, who are the right people to have on your team? How do you get them at the table? Are there various people that should or shouldn't be in various task force, different groups? Thinking about the people who might feel left out in a process, people who want to be consulted and not just informed of a decision. So the lover dimension is part of how you relate to other human beings. So I'm a 60-degree leader, which means you know how to flexibly move in and out of analyzing something, focusing on results, thinking about people, caring about people. We've talked about how COVID brought out the need for empathy. And by the way, maybe Nancy has moved forward, but I just wanted to say I was sad to hear about her marriage. And Nancy, if you're listening, sounds like you've persevered, but that must have been very tough. And then there's the part of you that has that, audacity to dream. It sounds to me from listening to you that you all have your heart set actually on many of those things, on a dream, on the leap, on your people, how to use all of these new digital tools to analyze information in new ways and to make them, not an enabler, but central to the businesses. And then, of course, how to get things done. So Rob, you have to tell me how much time I have because we started late and I can't keep track anymore.
We have 5 to 7 more minutes, Erica, and after that we can have Mohit on stage to ask you a few questions.
Okay, that sounds perfect. So if you don't take anything else away from our time, I would like to say that fundamentally, starting to understand that you have all these different voices, that you can focus on the big four, and the next time you have an opportunity, you have a conflict, just quickly ask yourself, what is the best advice my thinker would have for me? What's the best advice my lover or dreamer or thinker would have? And take into account each of those perspectives. And if I could see the next slide, what do you do with all of those perspectives? So I sometimes think about the big four as your inner top team, as if you have your dreamer as your CEO. Thanks, you can keep it. I'll get there in 1 second. That as your dreamer is almost your inner CEO, your thinker is your inner CFO, your lover operates as your inner CHRO, and your warrior is your chief operating officer, your COO. And just like you have a physical team around a table or around a Zoom screen, you have these members of a top team in you. You have an internal board of advisors in you. The other part of winning from within, and now we can go to that, and it has 7 elements of you to help you navigate your professional world and life, are called the transformers, which is like an inner board of directors that oversee your inner top team. And I'll touch on these briefly. The lookout is a part of you can call on when you're feeling reactive, when you're feeling like you want to kind of strike out or you're shutting down and pulling back. Your lookout will notice, hey, you've been using this member of your big four quite a lot. You've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm noticing that's quite a lot of thinking. Or you're focused on the dream, but you're not thinking about deadlines, resources, timelines, to get this thing done, so that the captain in you, and if I could visualize it this way, it's sort of like if your captain were in the middle and all the big four were standing around giving input to the middle, there's this captain part of you that gets to choose. If you don't figure out how to start listening and hearing those voices, not the way we heard it earlier, but hearing them distinctly, and then letting your captain make an informed choice, you will wind up being on your own default mode and just solving a problem by going into action, or solving a problem by trying to build trust and rapport and getting people to cooperate. And really, you want to come into that captain space in the middle and let your captain choose or decide which of these four should be the one that is guiding you forward. The Voyager, which is the place that we kind of started and we'll come back to as the last member of your board of directors, is the part that expresses, as sentient beings, as human beings, we have an inborn, innate drive to grow. We have a desire to get better and to learn and to practice. We stifle that impulse at some point, often in our professional lives. But really, who we are fundamentally is creatures who want to expand. And I'll come back to something someone said earlier, that even a small change can turn out to have a big impact. So you don't have to suddenly drop all the skills that helped you become successful. Someone said, what got me here won't get us there. Keep the things that got you here. And then, yes, this 7-part map points to different areas of development that any of you can build on. And I think all of those elements will help you make the quantum leap that you're very committed to making. And you're helping even if it's not working yet. So those are my thoughts on winning from within.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for that. I've had the privilege to speak to you earlier, and like I told you when we spoke, I'm a huge fan. I've always had, my paperback copy of Winning from Within, and now to supplement that, I have the hardback copy as well.
I'm telling you, Saurabh was very committed to getting you all signed hardcover copies. I'm so happy that you got it.
No, thank you for that. And it's such a wonderful framework and such a wonderful way of thinking about how to harness your inner strengths. And I think I mentioned to you that having a model like this really helps us identify the various sources of strength and the various sources of reason that we have. The parent within us, the child within us, and sometimes we almost undermine or underplay the role of the child or the role of the dreamer, when in reality that is possibly the most important, especially if you're looking to make a quantum leap. So I have one question for you, Erica, to kick us off, and then we'll wait for other questions from the audience. And it's a question about change, because we all love change, but we don't want to change ourselves. If you ask people if they want change, everybody wants change, but really they want other people. And like I mentioned, when I've done the exercise myself, which I would heartily recommend for everybody to do, my dreamer was underdeveloped. So how does one go about changing and challenging the aspects of one's personality? The one hasn't really, how do you develop a muscle that you haven't really used very much in the past?
It's a great question. So I have a bunch of answers to that question. One of them is to remember that because these are archetypes, they're all in you. They're born in you. So even little kids, when they start watching cartoons, understand the idea of the hero and the villain, right? These patterns are recognizable. So expanding along the path of these big four, it's not so much that you have to learn as remember or reactivate parts of yourself that already are there. The second thing is that for a long, long time, the science of research told us that brains are developing up until about 18 years old, and then they stop. And what we know now, for the last 15 years of neuroscience, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this idea, is about the neuroplasticity of the brain. So as you're doing new things, new behaviors, new mindsets, as was mentioned earlier, you're actually forging new neural pathways in your brain. And as you do that, and as you reinforce these sort of new synaptic connections, you're changing. You're changing the way that you, your perspective on the world, your sense of your own, possibility. And it's easier than you think. Again, if you aim for these micro changes, small changes, it's easier than you think to bring all of these things online. Uh-oh, Mohit, I can't hear you.
I was going to say, so it's a little bit like changing the direction of a very large ship, again, to use the nautical metaphor that you used previously, is you change it slightly by degrees. And, with time, it almost is like a super tanker. You have to allow for a certain amount of time for the micro change to be noticed. And like you said, it's you're helping, but it'll take time.
Understand more about sailing than I do. Yes, no, exactly. Yes, exactly. It doesn't have to be an internal revolution. Particularly since you are all kind of, launching this journey together. And one of the things Mohit had said to me, to give people even a shared language or a similar framework is already a huge accelerator. Because you can say to someone, just in the spirit of coaching, for example, I think our team has been going around and around, thinking about every aspect and every implication, consequence. I think we need to decide, meaning cut through all the thinking and make a gentle warrior move. Like, let's act. What are we going to do here? And you can gently say, like, I think we got a lot of thinker. forgive me for coming in as a warrior here. We got to stop the discussion. Or I wonder if everyone is feeling included in this conversation. We've only heard from 2 people. Would others, like to share their opinions? You can make those moves explicit because you've just had this shared framework.
Right. No, that's a very useful framework for us to use. And just to be sort of mindful about what portion of us is talking at this time. But we've got a lot of questions, Erica, and because we have a very competitive bunch of people in the company, there are already questions about which archetype is the best.
Exactly.
Which I would suspect is, they're all equally valid. But
whichever one you have as a spike, that's the best one. Yes, of course, there are no good or bad archetypes. It's a little like saying which is the best, north, east, south, or west, right? Or winter, spring, summer, fall. You might have a preference for one of those seasons. You might be a winter person or a summer person, but broadly speaking, none of those seasons is better than another one. And a lot of people choose not to live in places where it's like summer all year round because they want to experience, the range of different, feelings, smells, sights of these different seasons, because it can become a little bit boring if you only have one.
Right. And there's another wonderful question from Vinita, which is about, how do you suppress your natural instincts to follow one archetype and, be more deliberate in your decision making? So if your normal impulse is to jump into every situation and, take the lead as a warrior, how do you hold yourself back in a context where you're trying to, get a new team to get the confidence that they can do it themselves, for instance?
So I'll give you a couple of just sort of tips about that. Long term, and you've heard Mohit use the word mindful many times this morning. Developing your lookout, that's the part that is going to signal to you, you're doing your default again. And so the more mindful you become before you speak or act, you'll start to notice, and that will help you shift to another choice. In the very short term, something you can do is watch someone on your team who really emphasizes one of these more than you do. You might say like, well, God, if Jay were gonna, he wouldn't have said that. He would have said this. So today I'm going to play him. I know what he would have said. And you can just sort of stretch yourself by imagining taking the seat of someone else. And the third, I would say, is because you're doing this together, you can ask someone on your team, I'm really trying to, tap more into my dreamer. Can you give me a little feedback at the end of that meeting? Was I able to do that? Or, just remind me every time before we get on the Zoom call, I'm going to try to express from possibility and audacity. You can coach each other, and really encourage each other and give each other feedback on how it's going. You'll be surprised how quickly you can expand that default.
No, that's a great model to follow, because it's our own lookout, but I guess everybody else's lookout can be watching out for.
Exactly.
Outsource
your lookout a little bit.
Yes, supplement your lookout.
Exactly.
So my last question for you, Erica, is, you've obviously worked with multiple organizations, and you've seen various public figures. Who to you, which leader to you sort of exemplifies a well-rounded outlook towards leadership? Is there somebody, some organization you come across, or some, even political or social leaders you come across, where you think that sense of balance is there between, the dreamer, the thinker, the warrior, and the lover, and also in terms of the various dimensions of time?
I realized that you were all going to say, boo, this is like a very pathetic answer. I have to honestly say, you guys today have really inspired me. You're not using this framework explicitly, but throughout these panels, we have heard from leaders from each of these perspectives. If you go back and think about these sessions, the balance and the diversity of perspectives that you value, that you brought out in this meeting, the different voices that you are, of course you keep saying to each other, like, great perspective, great session, thanks for the insights, the way that you express appreciation for each other, the way that you have performed and hit these amazing targets and you want to go more. How do we go further? Obviously, you are capable of performing and delivering results. And people are talking about trends that they're observing. you really, I'm being quite serious. You really have impressed me and touched me about sort of how you're using your inner diversity. That's what I'm present to right now, to be honest with you, just, listening to you guys. And, I would say again that at the end of the day, your human essence, your humanity will be the differentiator. At the end of the day, who you are, who each of you are, how you cultivate your inner wisdom and inner capacity to lead the world and society and the organization and your home and family life, that's the thing that will actually be your competitive advantage at the end of the day, my belief. So I really love that you're twinning, all of the stuff you've talked about, the technology, but still, giving me a chance to share and giving others a chance to bring in how important it is that you keep your eye on the ball of your capability, ultimately coming down to how you lead yourself.
No, thank you so much, Erica. It really means a lot to us. We obviously have a reasonable level of healthy self-regard, but thank you for that compliment. And
I hope you can tell it is totally sincere. I'm not avoiding your question, but that's really what's on my mind for the last few hours. It's impressive.
No, thank you. That means a lot to us. And finally, I have taken your advice. I am writing a letter to my 56, 57-year-old self, and I look forward to discussing with you as you had offered.
I can't wait. So thank you all. Thanks for the preparation, Saurabh and Bharat, and I wish you a lovely rest of your sessions.
Thank you, Erica. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Erica. It was wonderful.
Ciao, guys.
Ciao.